Hi again. In 30 Years of Watchtower Slave, William Schnell dealing with the years 1938, 1939, when he was deeply involved in the zone work, as it was then defined by Rutherford, and organizing the theocracy and bringing it into full fruition before, presumably, Armageddon would break out in the early 1940s, and fascism would take over the West, as was predicted by Rutherford himself. Chapter 18, therefore, bringing Zone 1 into line. And here he describes the work of the so-called zone servants. Now back to the zone work. I was assigned as zone servant of zone number 1, the state of Ohio. This consisted of Ashtabula, Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana counties in Ohio, and Lawrence and Mercer counties in Pennsylvania. In most cases, zone servants were to spend 1 week with each company in rotation. During that time, they were to train the publishers daily in the 7 steps and the new techniques of brainwashing, which I explained a little while back. Later, they were to report on such as were considered eligible for positions as servants and recommend them to the society. You will remember that at the time the theocracy was announced, the Watchtower Society had requested every company of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the land to vote in a resolution declaring that henceforth they would surrender the privilege of electing their own leaders and filling their own congregational positions, and would acknowledge the society as the sole source of all organizational instructions, directions for all work to be done, and the sole authority for the appointment of all servants. Having thus voted and signed away all their rights, and they were now subject to surveillance by the Society's eyes and ears, namely the zone servants. This was now the standard procedure in most zones. In some, however, special instructions were to be carried out first as preparation for this theocratic procedure. That was the case in the zone now assigned to me. As I stated before, I had to reduce the influence of the leaders in Youngstown and to start issues in Ohio. In order to do this properly, after I had made the first weekly round of visits throughout the entire zone, I was allowed to spend only a few days with each company, spending less time with the smaller, more time with the larger. He has a subhead now, Divisions, Cliques, and Jealousy. The first visit to Youngstown disclosed that the society had gauged the condition of the company correctly. One group, disfellowshipped some time before, had been reluctantly reinstated. The group now in the saddle consisted mostly of unspiritual Jonadaps. These were trying to oust the spiritual remnant, which consisted in this case of the younger Ruth Esther class, which was naturally very much interested to stay in power. In the middle was an unaffiliated group. Each of these groups saw to it that its spokesman got to me with its side of the story, each reporting on the other. Being there to spy on them, I naturally listened attentively and formed my own opinions. I did not do a thing there my first trip round, but just let matters ride. My next company was Niles, in which surroundings the same conditions existed on a smaller scale. The territory of this particular company extended all the way into Ashtabula County, but it was clamoring for more territory. Youngstown held territory almost all over Mahoning County at the time, and deep into Trumbull County. It seemed as if all these companies were jealous of their own honor. They all felt they had too little territory, though they already spent most of their time traveling long distance in this territory, making very few calls every Sunday, covering the vast territories they held not more than once a year, and sometimes once every 2 years. Being one who believed strongly in the 7-step program, I was, of course, deadly set against such slipshod working, and it was this sort of thing that I as zone servant was to eliminate. It was my responsibility to get the publishers to concentrate on their home base, to organize and intensify their work there, and to follow the procedure of the 7 steps of brainwashing and training. To carry out such a program, the smallest territory possible, commensurate with publishers on hand to train, was the ideal. In Niles, then I found one nucleus of brethren, another within this company's territory in Girard, and another in Newton Falls, and still another in Greene, near Cortland. I therefore split this company 4 ways, making 4 small companies out of it, and instructed each of these nuclei to forget about all the territory between and to concentrate on their immediate neighborhoods. Of course, this soon forced the old company servant and his helpers out, and new Jonadabs were put in their places. In Warren there were also 3 cliques, so little did they trust one another that no one was allowed to give me lodging and board. Instead, they rented a hotel room for me during my first stay and jointly paid for it. I eventually broke that company up into 3 units, one in Warren, another in Leavittsburg, and a third in Champion Heights. By the time I got to Jefferson, I had quite a number of people in an uproar. Next section is entitled An Ultimatum. The judge thought that the proper time had arrived to give me a taste of my dossier. So I was awakened at 11 o'clock one night by the company servant and assistant company servant of the Youngstown Company. They brought me from Youngstown a letter mailed to me there from the judge. It consisted of 22 typewritten pages in which the judge really laid me out. To it I was commanded to give a yes or no answer. Was I going to cooperate or not? By throwing this dossier at me, they were making sure I was going to perform according to their wishes. I knew when they started gathering it, which was after I had left Bethel, that this is how it would be used. It did not shock me at all. This certainly surprised my visitors. I could see astonishment written on their faces. They probably had been told I might explode. So incredulous must the report of my behavior have seemed to their superiors in the Adams Street office that they sent another zone servant and a confidant of one of the Bethel cliques to see me the next week in Cano, where I was serving that company. After observing how I conducted the meeting and otherwise checking on me, they were satisfied that I was carrying no grudge. What they did not realize was that as a trained servant from Germany of the Magdeburg office, I had long before been trained never to be shocked by anything that Watchtower Society politics might bring forth, but always to carry on unthinkingly and in robot fashion. I was performing here like an old-timer, and these boys in Brooklyn were new at this theocratic dictatorship business. I now say it with shame. I already was hardened. I had only one goal, and that was to make this zone theocratic. Nobody was going to stop me. Next time he talks about the spy system being extended. Excuse me. Put in a link to a video we did on Rutherford's bragging in the early 1930s that he was now, the so-called society was now getting all its light, not from the Holy Spirit, but from angels. See you next time.